So ever wonder why a holy book has a whole chapter dedicated to thunder? Let's get into it.
Sure, you'll find chapters on the spider and the bee, but these aren't just random names.
In fact, there aren't chapters on faith or Islam, and that's a huge clue right there.
For ages, if people didn't get something, they feared it. And if they feared it, they worshipped it. Look at all these thunder gods, from Zeus to Thor to Talak. It happened everywhere, a classic human response.
So, why do we worship these gods anymore? It's not about being less religious. It's because we got smarter. We figured out the science. And just like that, the thunder gods vanished.
And this gets to a core idea. Understand nature, don't worship it. The book isn't the final destination. It's a signpost. It's pointing us to read the book of the universe for ourselves. So how does thunder work? Well, it's all about friction between ice crystals and water droplets. Simple physics.
And that friction creates a lightning bolt with a temperature of, wait for it, 30,000 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, that's 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. Science explains that incredible power.
This whole thing points to 2 very different ways of knowing, and confusing them is a huge mistake. You've got Ghaib, the unseen, which is about faith, and then there's Shahada, the observable, which is about science.
Ghaib is for stuff beyond our senses, like God or the afterlife. It's the realm of faith.
Shahada, on the other hand, is the physical world, the stuff we can test and measure. That's science's playground. The real crisis happens when we mix these up. Like saying, I don't believe in evolution. It's science, not belief.
And this confusion, it's had some pretty devastating consequences in the Muslim world's history.
Europe gets the printing press. Meanwhile, a top observatory in Istanbul is destroyed for religious reasons. Oof.
And the reason they gave for destroying it? Spying on the angels' skirts. A perfect mix-up of the 2 realms.
So what happened? A war was waged on knowledge itself, not on ignorance, and the cost was huge.
Which brings us to the key point. Real knowledge actually serves true faith. It gets rid of the fake stuff.
The Quran has this incredible metaphor for it. As for the foam, it vanishes, but what benefits humanity remains.
Think of it like getting precious metal from ore. The worthless stuff, the foam, disappears. Only what helps people lasts.
So, what benefits humanity is what's real. The question then becomes, what is your essence?
So what if I told you that faith and science aren't actually at odds? What if they're meant to be 2 sides of the same coin? Today, we're going to dig into a really surprising perspective from the Quran, one that suggests the book itself is a guide to understanding the world around us, scientifically.
And to get to the heart of it, we have to start with this fascinating question from our source material. Think about it. The Quran has chapters named after things like thunder, bees, and spiders, but you will not find a single chapter called faith or religion or anything like that. So why? What's going on there?
Well, it turns out the answer is hiding in plain sight, right there in the chapter names themselves. If you look at what the Quran chooses to name its chapters after, you start to see a really powerful message about what its main purpose is.
I mean, just look at this list. The thunder, the bee, the spider, the sun, the moon, animals, even the human. The entire book is just packed with these references to the real, tangible, observable world. And this is no accident. It's a very deliberate choice designed to point our attention toward nature itself.
So why this intense focus on the natural world? Well, it's a direct answer to a huge human problem. For most of our history, when we looked at nature, we didn't see it with curiosity. We saw it with fear.
And this is so interesting. For literally thousands of years, anything humanity couldn't explain, we turned into a god. Just take thunder, for example. Almost every single major culture, the Greeks, the Norse, the Hindus, they all invented a thunder god to explain that terrifying sound coming from the sky. Zeus, Thor, you name it. It was the go-to response to a mystery.
And this right here illustrates the shift perfectly. We don't build temples to thunder anymore. And why not? Because we understand it. We know it's not some angry god, it's a sonic shockwave. We literally moved it from the fear and worship category over to the science and understanding category. We replaced superstition with knowledge.
And the science is just amazing, right? We now know that thunder is what happens when the air around a lightning strike gets superheated and expands faster than the speed of sound. It's a totally natural process, not a supernatural one.
This exact shift from a thunder god to a scientific fact, is precisely what the source material is getting at. The whole point is that knowledge isn't the enemy of faith. It's actually a filter. By explaining how the world works, science gets rid of all those false gods we invented out of ignorance, leaving behind a much clearer, more focused belief.
So, to help us wrap our minds around this relationship between what we can know and what we believe, the Quran lays out this really simple but powerful idea that reality is split into two different realms.
Okay, so first up you've got Shahada, which is the seen world. This is everything we can see, touch, measure, and test. It's the physical universe. This is science's playground, and we're meant to explore it with our reason and our tools.
And then, on the other hand, you have Gaib, the unseen world. Now, this is the stuff that's beyond our five senses. Concepts like the nature of God or the afterlife, things that science just can't measure. This is the domain of faith.
Now, here's the crucial part. The source argues that so many of history's biggest conflicts happened when people got these two realms mixed up. Specifically, when they started treating the natural, seen world as if it were a matter of faith instead of something to be investigated.
And trust me, this confusion wasn't just some abstract philosophical mistake. It had very real, very costly consequences that held human progress back for hundreds of years.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's pretty shocking. The printing press kicks off a knowledge revolution in Europe in the 1450s, but it takes nearly 300 years before it's officially allowed in the Ottoman Empire. And then you see this. A brand new, state-of-the-art observatory is built in Istanbul in 1579. 1 year later, it's destroyed, demolished with cannon fire.
And you want to know why they destroyed it? The official justification was based on a rumor that the astronomers were spying on the angels' skirts. It's the perfect tragic example of what happens when you get the realms confused. You take a superstition from the unseen world, the Gaib, and use it to literally blow up scientific progress in the seen world, the Shahada. So if superstition and fear can be that destructive, how does the Quran suggest we tell the difference? How do we know what's just noise and what has real, lasting value?
Well, incredibly, the answer comes from a beautiful metaphor in the very chapter we started with, Surah Al-Ra'd, the thunder. The verse compares truth and falsehood to the water from a flood.
Okay, so picture this. A massive flood rushes through a valley. It creates all this loud, churning, visible foam on the surface. That foam, the kuruf, is like falsehood. It's dramatic, it's noisy, it gets all the attention, but it's empty, and it vanishes in an instant. But what's left behind, what actually settles on the earth, is the jevra, the water and the nutrients. That's the essence, the truth, the stuff that actually benefits humanity.
And that really brings it all home, doesn't it? It leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. In our own lives, in this age of constant information and noise, how do we tell the difference? What is the useless foam we're all distracted by, and what is the essential knowledge that actually benefits us and that will truly remain?
All right, do me a favor, just for a second. Close your eyes. I want you to try and imagine you are one of your ancestors.
Okay.
And we're talking way back, Paleolithic era, maybe 30,000 years ago.
Wow, okay.
You're huddled in some shallow cave, maybe just under a big rock overhang. It's the middle of the night. The fire's gone out. And outside, there's just this absolute crushing darkness. You can't see your hand in front of your face, kind of dark.
And a silence, too, right? A really heavy, dangerous silence that, we don't really get anymore in the modern world with all our background noise.
That's a great point. Yeah. And then completely without warning, CRC. The entire world just turns blinding white for a split second. It exposes everything, the trees, the predators, the fear on your family's faces. And before your eyes can even adjust, the ground under you just shakes with this roar that sounds like the sky's literally tearing itself apart.
It's such a primal experience. I mean, even now, it's safe in our houses with our insulated walls and double-pane windows, a really violent thunderclap.
Yeah.
It still triggers that lizard brain. Your cortisol spikes. Your heart just skips a beat.
Exactly. But for that early human, there's no National Weather Service app on their phone.
Right.
There's no high school physics teacher to explain atmospheric pressure or, electrostatics. There is just the sound.
Just the sound.
And that sound is loud, it is angry, and it is coming from directly above.
It feels personal, it feels targeted.
Right. So what is the only logical conclusion that a human brain can possibly make in that moment?
Something is up there.
There is something up there. It is massive, and it is screaming at me.
And that specific moment of terror, I mean, that is the seed of so much of human history. Because you're right, the instinct isn't to analyze the barometric pressure.
Yeah.
The instinct is to drop to your knees and just beg. You start to bargain with the noise.
What did I do? What do you want from me? I'll give you whatever you want, just please don't kill me.
Fear creates gods. Or maybe more accurately, ignorance of the mechanism creates the need to personify the force if you don't know what it is.
You assume it's a who.
You have to assume it's a who.
And that is exactly where we are starting today. Welcome back to the deep dive. We are unpacking a piece of audio that, honestly, I didn't expect it to go where it went. We're looking at a lecture by Mustafa Islamalu. And, I saw the title and I thought, okay, we're in for a theology lesson. It's an analysis of Surah Arad.
Which translates to the thunder chapter.
Oh, from the Quran.
Right.
The thunder. But if you tuned in expecting some kind of sleepy traditional sermon where everyone just nods along, you're going to be very, very surprised.
It really was. I mean, I have the notes right here. We've got quantum mechanics. We've got the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, Sumerian history, and a really aggressive critique of what it even means to be religious.
Yeah.
It's not what I expected at all. No, it's a blistering lecture. The central thesis is just incredibly provocative. The source argues that the entire purpose of this text, this thunder chapter, is to force humanity to make a fundamental cognitive shift.
A shift.
A huge one. A shift from worshiping nature to understanding nature.
Which, okay, that sounds like a nice bumper sticker slogan, understand nature.
Right.
But as we got deeper into the source material, I realized he's saying something much, much more radical than that. He's arguing that blind faith isn't just lazy.
Well,
he says it's actually a violation of the religion itself.
Right. He's taking on that age-old tension.
Yeah.
Faith versus science. Usually we see them as enemies, or at the very least sort of non-overlapping circles.
Totally. You do your science in the lab, you do your praying in the church or the mosque, and never the twain shall meet. That's the idea.
Exactly.
But our source is arguing that true faith actually requires scientific literacy.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
He argues that if you refuse to understand the thermodynamics of that lightning bolt we were just imagining, you aren't just being unscientific.
You're being
a bad believer. He suggests that ignorance is actually a form of deep disrespect to the Creator.
That is a bold claim. And to back it up, we're going to have to walk through some pretty heavy history today. We're going to talk about destroyed observatories, banned printing presses, and what happens when a civilization decides to stop reading what the speaker calls the book of the universe.
It really is a journey from the sound of fear to the silence of understanding.
So let's step out into the storm. Section 1. The thunder. The source starts by setting this historical stage. He says it's no coincidence that there's a chapter called The Thunder.
Right.
Because for the vast, vast majority of human history, thunder wasn't just weather. It was the headliner.
It was the main event of the pantheon. And the source really, he just runs through the roster here. It's a who's who of thunder gods.
It is.
And it's staggering when you see them all listed out because you suddenly realize just how universal this is. It's not one culture. It's every culture.
I actually made a list from the notes because I wanted to see the spread. And we all know the big ones, right? Zeus from Greece, the guy with the beard and the lightning bolt.
Archetype, the CEO of Olympus, yeah.
Then you've got Jupiter from Rome. So basically the same guy, just new management. Thor in Scandinavia with his hammer. But the source goes so much deeper.
Oh, really?
He mentions Adad in Sumer, Baal in Canaan.
And Baal is so interesting because if you read the Abrahamic texts, the Bible or the Quran Baal is often the bad guy.
Yeah.
The rival deity.
Right.
But he was, first and foremost, a storm god. He was the one who brought the rain and the thunder, which for any agricultural society, that means he controlled life and death.
Absolutely. Then we go east. You've got Indra in Hinduism, Ligong in China, Susanoo in Japan.
Check for the Mayans.
Yeah. And even Kuktengri in Turkic mythology.
It's every single continent.
Hey.
And the analysis the source provides here is so crucial, we have to ask the question, why? Why does every single one of these cultures, separated by oceans and thousands of years, independently invent a thunder god?
And we touched on it in the intro. It's that gap, isn't it?
It is 100% the gap between cause and effect. Ancient humans see the result, the flash, the boom, the fire, the rain. But they cannot grasp the cause.
No idea.
They don't know about ions. They don't know about updrafts and downdrafts. So the human mind fills that vacuum with personality.
It's loud, so it must be a mouth screaming. It kills things, so it must be a weapon.
Exactly. It's almost like pareidolia. You know, when you see a face in a cloud.
Oh, yeah.
We hear a noise, and we can't help but hear a voice. We project agency onto chaos. And the source makes this really interesting point here. He says that knowledge acts as a kind of filter for divinity.
A filter for divinity. Write that down for me.
Well, think about it. When you don't know how a river floods, the river is a god. You have to pray to the river. You sacrifice a goat to the river god so it doesn't drown your village. When you don't know how the sun rises every morning, the sun is a god. You build temples to the sun. But the moment you learn about hydrology,
River becomes just water.
the moment you understand orbital mechanics,
The sun becomes just a star.
those gods vanish.
Yeah.
They just evaporate. The source argues that scientific knowledge reduces the pantheon down. It clears out all the clutter. It takes 1,000 little scary gods and reveals the mechanisms behind them.
So science is like the broom that sweeps away all the little gods.
I love that image.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is where the lecture takes a really hard left turn straight into physics.
Yeah, it does.
And I really appreciated this because usually when you hear a theologian talk about nature, it's all very poetic. Oh, look at the majestic clouds.
Right. Very abstract.
But this source, he just pivots straight into a physics lecture.
He does. He basically stops preaching and starts teaching thermodynamics.
He breaks down the actual mechanism of the roar. And I think it's worth spending a minute on this because the source goes into detail to really prove his point about the beauty of the complexity.
So he did the caveman perspective. Now let's do the reality.
Let's do the reality. So what is actually happening up there? Why does the sky crack open?
Lay on us.
Well, it's a massive thermodynamic engine. You have the sun heating the earth, which causes warm, moist air to rise. It goes up, up, up into the atmosphere.
Okay.
As it gets higher, it cools down. The moisture condenses into tiny water droplets, and then way up high, it turns into ice crystals.
So you've got this constant churn of rising warm air and sinking cold ice.
Exactly. And inside that cloud, it is just chaotic. These particles are smashing into each other constantly. The rising water droplets are bumping into the falling ice crystals. And just like when you rub a balloon on your hair,
It creates a static charge.
a massive static charge. The cloud basically becomes a giant battery. The negative charge sinks to the bottom of the cloud, and the positive charge stays up at the top. But nature absolutely hates an imbalance.
It always wants to equalize. It wants to close the circuit.
It wants to close the circuit. So eventually, the voltage difference becomes so immense, we're talking hundreds of millions of volts,
Wow.
that the air itself just breaks down. It stops being an insulator and becomes a conductor. A little stepped leader of negative charge starts to zigzag down from the cloud.
Okay.
And at the same time, a streamer of positive charge reaches up from the ground, usually from a tall tree or a building.
And when they meet.
The switch is flipped. A massive return stroke of current shoots up that channel.
Yeah.
And that is the lightning.
The flash.
That's the flash. And here is the stat from the source that it blew my mind. He says that narrow channel of air is heated to 30,000 degrees Celsius.
I wrote that down too. 30,000 degrees. Can you contextualize that for us? Because hot is such an abstract word.
Okay. The surface of the sun, the literal star that powers our entire solar system,
Yeah.
is about 5,500 to 6,000 degrees Celsius.
Wait a second. So you're telling me a lightning bolt is what? 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun?
In that localized channel, just for a split second, yes.
That's insane.
It's an explosion of energy so intense that it literally rips the air molecules apart. That sudden, violent expansion of superheated air creates a supersonic shock wave.
And that shock wave is the thunder.
That shock wave is the thunder.
So the voice of the angry god is actually the sound of air exploding because it was heated to 30,000 degrees in less than a microsecond.
Precisely. And this is the pivot point of this whole section. The source asks, once you know that, once you understand that it's just friction and ions and dielectric breakdown, can you still worship it?
I mean, no, you can be impressed by it. You can be terrified of standing under a tree during a storm, but you can't build a temple to static friction.
You can't. The mystery is replaced by mechanics. And for some religious people, that feels like a loss. They feel like science is disenchanting the world.
Yeah, the unweaving the rainbow argument.
Exactly. But our source argues the complete opposite. He says this isn't a loss of spirituality at all. It's a purification of it. Because if you are worshiping the thunder, you're worshiping a result. You are worshiping a puff of superheated air. He says true faith is looking past the phenomenon to the laws that govern it. Don't worship the lightning. Worship the author of the physics that allows lightning to exist in the first place.
Which brings us to the central metaphor of this entire deep dive. This is the concept that really ties everything together. The source talks about the two books.
Yes, and this is a huge paradigm shift. Because usually in any religion, when you say the book, you mean the scripture.
Right, the text, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the words on the page.
Correct. But the source argues that there are two revelations. One is the written text, but the other one, and he argues it's the primary one,
Is the universe itself.
is the universe itself.
He uses this analogy that I've heard before, but never in this context. The finger pointing to the moon.
It's usually a Buddhist concept, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but he applies it so beautifully here to Islamic theology. He says, imagine the scripture, the verses, the text is a finger. And that finger is pointing at something. It's saying, look over there.
Okay.
And if you spend your whole life just staring at the finger,
You're an idiot.
well, but simply, yes.
If you spend all your time analyzing the fingernail and the knuckle and the skin on the finger, but you never actually turn your head to see what it's pointing at, you have missed the entire point of the finger's existence.
So in this analogy, the moon is the universe.
The moon is reality. It's nature, the cosmos. The source is arguing that the text is just a guidebook to help you read the real book, which is existence itself.
Hold on a second. Isn't the text supposed to be the holy part? I mean, for a believer, those words are sacred. Is he actually saying the text is secondary?
He's saying the text is functional. He has this one quote that I highlighted like 3 times. He says, someone who reads nothing but the Quran does not understand the Quran.
Wow. That is a shocking thing for a traditional theologian to say. You can just imagine people in the audience gasping at that.
Oh, for sure. But his logic, when you follow it, is kind of bulletproof. If the text keeps telling you, look at the stars, look at the camel, look at the rain, look at the bee, and you never actually look at those things because you're too busy reading the text, you have technically disobeyed the text.
You're following the instructions to read the instructions, but you're never actually building the furniture.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
Yeah.
You're just stuck in the manual forever.
This leads him to redefine a very common religious term, ayat. Now, from what I know, ayat usually just means a verse in the Quran, like a sentence.
Correct. The literal translation is sign. And in common usage, yes, it means a verse of scripture. But the source just expands this definition explosively.
How so?
He starts listing things that we do not normally think of as religious texts. He says the sun is an ayat, the spider is an ayat, the bee, the ant, the electron.
The electron is a verse of God.
It is a sentence in the book of the universe. And if you are illiterate in that book, if you don't know physics, if you don't know biology, then you are missing, what, 99% of the revelation.
He even gets personal with this. There's this really touching moment in the lecture where he talks about looking at a friend's face.
The hieroglyphics of the human face.
Yeah.
That was so poetic.
It was. He says he sat and just looked at the wrinkles on his friend's face. And he didn't just see skin. He said he read them like a text. Each line was a story.
The story of sorrow, yeah. A deep well of experience, survival, laughter.
It's just a beautiful expansion of what reading even means. He's saying that if you can't read the pain in a human face, or the complexity of an ant colony, or the majesty of a galaxy, then you are essentially illiterate in the eyes of the Creator.
Yeah.
Even if you've memorized every single holy book on earth.
It completely flips the script. It shifts the burden of proof. It means being religious isn't about withdrawing from the world to pray in a dark room.
Right.
It means being aggressively curious about the world. It frames science not as an enemy of faith, but as the primary method of worship.
But that kind of curiosity requires a framework, doesn't it? You can't just look at everything and say, it's God. You have to organize it. And this brings us right to section 3, epistemology. How we know what we know.
This is the heavy philosophical lifting of the lecture.
It really is.
And the source introduces 2 pillars for knowledge, Gabe and Shahada.
Okay, let's unpack these because they seem absolutely critical to his entire argument.
They are the foundation. So Gabe refers to the unseen. These are truths that you just cannot test in a lab. You can't put them under a microscope.
Things like the nature of God, the afterlife, angels, that sort of thing.
Exactly. This is the domain of revelation.
Yeah.
You accept it because you trust the source of the information. It's faith in the purest sense of the word.
Okay, that makes sense. So what is shahada?
Shahada means the witnessed. This is everything we can see, measure, touch, and test.
So nature, physics, biology, history, sociology.
All of it.
Yeah.
This is the domain of the intellect and of science.
So, okay. Faith for the unseen, science for the witnessed. That seems pretty clear-cut.
It should be, but the source argues that, historically, religious tradition made a fatal error, a catastrophic category mistake.
They mix the two up.
They mix them up completely. He says they tried to turn Gabe, the unseen, into knowledge, pretending they knew the exact mechanics of heaven or the precise nature of God's throne, which is impossible to know, and worse. They tried to turn Shahada, the witness world, into a matter of belief.
Treating objective facts as if they were optional opinions.
Yes, and the perfect example he gives is evolution.
I found this part really striking. He says, just bluntly, evolution is not a matter of belief.
Right. He says saying, I don't believe in evolution is like saying, I don't believe in photosynthesis or I don't believe in gravity. It's just a category error.
So how does he frame it?
He describes evolution as God's management style in the physical world. It's part of the Shahada realm. It's something we can witness in the fossil record and in genetics.
So for him, rejecting it doesn't make you pious.
No.
It just makes you ignorant of the witnessed world.
Exactly. You are refusing to read the book of the universe.
He uses this metaphor here that, I admit, it had me laughing, but it's actually quite tragic. He calls it the prosthetic leg.
It's such a brilliant image. He says that religion naturally stands on two legs, Gabe, which is faith, and Shahada, which is reason and science.
Okay, healthy anatomy. You walk on two legs.
Right. But then, he says, tradition came along and added a third leg.
A third leg?
Yes, a third artificial prosthetic leg called Zan.
And Zan means conjecture, rumor, assumption.
All of the above. It's all the weak historical narrations, the myths, the cultural habits that got dressed up as religion over time. He gives that hilarious example of the eating eggplant hadith.
The merchant. I honestly thought this had to be a joke at first.
No, it's a classic example of fabrication from the literature.
Right.
So the story goes, you have a merchant in medieval Baghdad who has a huge surplus of eggplants.
Okay.
They're about to rot. He needs to sell them, and fast. So what does he do?
He invents a quote.
He invents a saying and attributes it to the prophet. Something like, eggplant is a cure for all ailments.
No way.
Yes, and people believed it. And for centuries, people might treat that piece of complete nonsense with the same reverence as actual scripture or a scientific fact. That is the third leg.
I see.
And the source asks the audience, if you have two healthy legs and you decide to strap on a third wooden leg, do you walk faster?
No, you cripple yourself. You trip over it constantly.
And that is his diagnosis of the Islamic world's intellectual stagnation. He says they are tripping over this third leg of superstition and rumor instead of walking firmly on the two legs of faith and science.
And the cost of that tripping. Oh, well, it's not just about eggplants, is it? It gets incredibly dark. This brings us to section 4, the historical tragedy. And the source, he really doesn't pull any punches here. He lays out the real-world consequences of this anti-intellectualism.
It's painful accounting. He starts with the printing press.
This is a famous historical grievance, right? The printing press was invented in Europe around 1440 by Gutenberg.
Yep. And in China, block printing existed centuries before that. But in the Ottoman Empire, the source highlights a 300-year delay.
300 years.
It was effectively banned or heavily restricted for the Muslim population until well into the 18th century.
300 years. Just think about how much information moves in 300 years.
It's the difference between the Middle Ages and the Enlightenment. While Europe was mass-producing books, spreading literacy, and sparking the scientific revolution, the Islamic world was still hand-copying manuscripts, one by one.
And what was the reason? Was it really just theology? Did they think the machine itself was unholy or something?
The source argues it was really just economic protectionism disguised as theology. He blames the calligraphers' lobby.
The other calligraphers' lobby?
Think about it. There were thousands upon thousands of scribes who made their living copying books by hand. It was a massive industry.
Right.
They didn't want to lose their jobs to a machine. So they lobbied the religious scholars to declare the printing press haram, or unholy.
So they used religion to protect their own monopoly?
It's always about the money, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the result?
Yeah.
The result was that generations were left in ignorance. He has that really biting line where he says they couldn't even read their ancestors' tombstones.
Because they never learned how to read. But it gets worse. It wasn't just passive neglect of technology. It was active destruction. we have to talk about the observatory.
The story of Taqiyuddin. This one really hurts. So we're in Istanbul in the 1570s. The Ottomans actually built a world-class observatory.
And when we say world-class, we mean it could have rivaled anything in Europe at the time.
Absolutely. Taqiyuddin was a brilliant astronomer. His observatory was on par with Tycho Brahe's in Europe, which was the gold standard. They were mapping the stars, creating incredibly precise tables. It represented this possible future where the Islamic world reclaimed its golden age of science.
And then
they shelled it.
I'm sorry, what? The Ottoman army shelled their own observatory.
Yes, from the sea. They completely destroyed it.
Why? What possible reason could they have for that? Did they think the astronomers were spies or something?
It was the rumor. It was the third leg of conjecture. The religious scholars spread a rumor that the astronomers were messing with the heavens.
Okay.
Specifically, the line that was used was that they were looking up the skirts of angels.
You have got to be kidding me. Looking up the skirts of angels.
That was the pretext. And the source uses this to launch this furious critique. He says it shows this deep, perverse obsession with below-the-belt issues, sexuality, modesty, scandal, while completely ignoring the majestic cosmos above.
They were so worried about metaphorical skirts
That they burned down their own window to the universe.
That is just devastating. And the source connects this directly to the fall of the empire. This isn't just a sad little story. He sees it as a cause of death. He brings up the marble cannonballs.
This is the visual that just stays with you. He makes this stark comparison between 1453 and 1915.
Okay, so in 1453, the conquest of Istanbul, the Ottomans had the best cannon technology in the world. They were the superpower. They had the urban cannon that could smash through the walls of Constantinople.
Correct. They were on the absolute cutting edge of science and technology. But then he jumps forward to World War I, the Battle of Gallipoli, 1915.
Mm-hmm.
The Ottoman Empire is collapsing. They're fighting for their very survival against the British and the French. And the source points out that at Gallipoli, the Ottoman cannons were still firing solid marble balls.
Solid marble balls, like just big rock.
Essentially, non-explosive solid projectiles. Meanwhile, the European powers had modern ballistics. They had explosive shells, timed fuses.
So a British shell hits the ground and explodes, taking out an entire trench. An Ottoman shell hits the ground and just, rolls.
It bounces. It might crush you if it hits you directly, but it's basically medieval technology in a modern war. The source is practically screaming at history here. He says, you banned the press, you destroyed the observatory, and 400 years later, you are fighting modern science with marble rocks.
Stagnation isn't just embarrassing, it's deadly.
That's the lesson. If you reject the book of the universe, if you reject science, you don't just lose arguments, you lose wars, you lose civilizations. You get conquered by the people who did read the book.
So we've stripped away the thunder gods, we've looked at this tragedy of ignoring science, and now the source takes a really interesting turn. He goes from history straight into math.
Mathematical theology.
Yeah, he starts talking about constants, these unchangeable rules of reality.
He brings up pi, 3.14159, and so on. He says it applies to atoms, it applies to galaxies, it applies to black holes. It's universal.
And he says you can't negotiate with pi. You can't just say, hey, can we round this up to 4 for today? It would make the math a lot easier.
Right. The shop owner set the price. It is what it is. It's a fixed truth of the universe. And then he mentions Planck's constant.
The fundamental unit of action in quantum mechanics, it's, 10 to the power of negative 43? Some incredibly small number.
An unbelievably small number. And the source calls this the Allahu Akbar point.
What does he mean by that?
He means it's the limit of physical reality. It's like the pixel size of the universe. You can't get any smaller or more fundamental than that.
And this leads to his theory about God. He proposes that God is the existence constant.
It's a fascinating way to frame it. He argues that just as you cannot explain the properties of a circle without pi, you cannot explain the fundamental question, why is there something rather than nothing, without this existence constant?
So he's essentially treating God as a variable in the equation of reality.
Or maybe the one constant. He says God is the variable that prevents the equation of the universe from collapsing into nothingness. If you remove that constant, the math of existence itself just falls apart.
It's such a different way of talking about God than the old man in the sky throwing lightning bolts.
Completely.
It's God as the bedrock of physics.
It anchors the divine in the very fabric of reality rather than in our superstitious gaps in knowledge. It's a God that you discover through calculus, not just through chanting.
Okay, moving on to section 6. The source brings us back down to earth. back to ethics and society. And he uses another metaphor from the text, the foam versus the ore.
This comes directly from a verse in Surah Arad, and the imagery is of a flood, a huge torrent of water rushing down a valley.
Okay.
And on top of that water, there is foam, bubbles, scum, debris, little twigs.
Right.
And the verse says, the foam vanishes, but what benefits humanity remains in the earth.
The scum theory of history, as you called it earlier.
Yeah, the scum theory. The source interprets foam as all the cultural fads, the angry rhetoric, the useless debates, the political noise.
Twitter.
Oh, absolutely, Twitter. It looks big, it floats right on top, it covers everything. It grabs all your attention.
But it has no weight.
No weight at all. It just bursts and disappears.
So what remains? What is the ore in this metaphor?
The ore is the constructive contributions. A book that teaches something useful. A building that shelters people. A well-raised child. A scientific discovery. The source is asking the listener really directly, are you making foam or are you mining ore?
I love that. Are you making foam? It's such a good question for a social media age. We spend so much energy on things that are going to vanish in 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. And the source connects this directly to the concept of sabe, or patience.
Now, usually when people say have patience, they mean just sit there and take it. Don't complain, be passive.
Exactly. Passive, waiting, giving up.
Yeah.
But the source completely redefines it. He says saber isn't giving up at all. It is active resistance against corruption.
So it's not waiting.
No, it's the stubborn refusal to become foam. It's digging in your heels and doing the hard work that matters, even when the flood of noise is raging all around you.
And he gives the ultimate example of this. The conquest of Mecca.
This is such a pivotal moment in Islamic history.
Yeah.
The Prophet Muhammad returns to the city that tortured him, that persecuted his followers, that drove him into exile for years.
And now he has the army. He has all the power. By the standards of the time, he should have executed all his enemies.
That was the standard operating procedure. Revenge. You win the war, you kill the losers.
But he doesn't.
He doesn't. He gathers them all together and he says, go, you are free.
Yeah.
He breaks the cycle of violence. That, the source argues, is ore. That is an action that benefits humanity and remains in the earth forever. It changed the culture.
But this source doesn't just praise history. He goes right back to critiquing it. He talks about the convert or die mentality that appeared in later periods.
He condemns it utterly. He brings up the very strange story of Sabbatai Sevi.
The Jewish Messiah figure from the 17th century.
Right. He was a very influential Jewish leader who claimed to be the Messiah. He was arrested by the Ottoman authorities. And they gave him a choice. Convert to Islam or lose your head.
A forced conversion.
The very definition of coercion. So, with a sword at his throat, he puts on a turban. He becomes a Muslim, in name at least. And the source just mocks the hypocrisy of this whole situation.
How so?
He says, you force a man to convert at sword point, and then for generations you call his descendants untrustworthy converts, or dunmay.
The turncoats.
It's just a sick game,
Oh.
The source says. You hold the sword, you force the lie, and then you blame the victim for lying. He uses this to show that religion without ethics, religion that relies on force rather than truth, is just foam. It's worthless.
He also attacks the racism of the Umayyad dynasty. I had never heard this story before. The Mosque of Wasit.
It's a horrific event.
Yeah.
So the Umayyads were the second caliphate, and the source describes them as basically being Arab supremacists. They didn't want non-Arabs converting to Islam.
Why not? That seems counterintuitive for what's supposed to be a missionary religion.
Because they wanted to keep collecting the jizya tax. It was a tax levied on non-Muslims.
So it's just about the money.
It was pure greed. If everyone converts, the tax revenue goes down. So when non-Arabs, Persians, Turks, Berbers did convert and demanded equal treatment, the Umayyads reacted with extreme violence. The source mentions they burned the Mosque of Wasit with 400 people inside.
400 people burned alive inside a mosque.
Because they were new Muslims.
Well,
Because they weren't Arabs. The source uses this to show that religious tradition is not this pure, innocent thing. It is full of crimes committed in the name of God. And if you don't face that history, the foam and the filth, you can't find the ore. You can't separate the truth from the power grab.
this leads perfectly into the final section, diversity. If the Umayyads wanted everyone to be the same, the source argues that nature wants the exact opposite.
The same water, different fruit argument.
I love this imagery. He says, look at a garden. You have the same soil. You water it with the exact same water, but what grows?
A lemon, which is sour. A pepper, which is hot. A persimmon, which is sweet. And a cucumber, which is, neutral.
Same inputs, total different outputs.
And the implication is that diversity is the factory setting of creation. God clearly loves variety. If he wanted everything to taste like a cucumber, he would have just made everything a cucumber.
A world of only cucumbers. It sounds pretty boring.
And very bland.
Hmm?
But the social application of this is profound. If nature is diverse, society should be too. Trying to force everyone to be the same religion, same thought, same culture, is fighting against the laws of nature, is fighting against God's own design.
He wraps this whole idea up with a thought on blindness. He says that being blind in the Quran isn't about eyesight.
No, not at all. It's about insight. He says a person who is physically blind can be enlightened and fully seeing in the spiritual sense.
Mm-hmm.
While a person with perfect 20/20 vision can be in total darkness if they can't see the truth of diversity in science.
So we have covered a lot of ground today. I mean, from thunder gods to quantum physics, from burning observatories to burning mosques. Let's try to bring it all home. What is the final verdict from our expert source?
The final verdict is that knowledge is protection.
Protection from what?
Protection from the little gods. Protection from superstition, from fear, from the manipulation of power-hungry leaders who want to use religion to control you.
Right.
The source believes that knowledge doesn't threaten faith, it purifies it. When you understand the lightning, you stop fearing the thunder god, and you can start to truly appreciate the creator of the physics behind it all.
He ends with this really beautiful call to action that involves the atmosphere.
The atmosphere analogy, yeah, I think this is the perfect place for us to land. He says, look at the atmosphere. It takes this raw, deadly radiation from space gamma rays, X-rays, solar flares, and it filters them. It turns that deadly energy into gentle light and warmth that sustains all life on Earth.
Without the atmosphere, the sun would just kill us instantly.
Exactly. And he says a community of knowledge acts just like the atmosphere. It takes the raw noise of the world, the anger, the confusion, the foam, the disinformation, and it filters it. It turns it into wisdom that sustains the society.
So the question he leaves us with is, are you part of the atmosphere? Are you helping to filter the noise? Or are you just adding to the radiation?
Are you adding to the foam, or are you the ore that remains?
It's a real challenge to every listener. And here is a final provocative thought to leave you with, building on everything we've discussed today. If the universe is the big book and the scripture is just the finger pointing at it,
then are we spending too much of our lives staring at the finger, arguing about the fingernail, and totally ignoring the stars it's pointing at?
Something to think about the next time you hear thunder. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Keep looking up.
See you next time.
Welcome to The Critique. Today we're looking at a lecture on Surah Ar-Ra'd, the thunder, which argues for reading the book of nature alongside the Quran and critiques scientific stagnation in the Islamic world. It's ambitious stuff. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, this piece is incredibly vivid. It opens with this amazing lesson on static electricity, friction, the 30,000-degree heat of lightning. It really pulls you in.
It does. It grabs you. But then, almost immediately, we hit a wall.
A complete wall. You go from the thermodynamics of the atmosphere, which is fascinating, straight into a sociological polemic about the Ottoman Empire and the printing press.
The whiplash is just so intense. 1 minute you're in a physics class, and the next you're in a history lecture hearing about 16th century political grievances. The transition between the examination of thunder and the historical critique is, well, it's too abrupt.
It honestly feels like two completely different scripts that were stapled together. You have the first part, which is objective fact, right? You can't argue with the temperature of lightning.
Right.
But then the second half is all interpretive history. And by, severing that connection, the speaker loses the authority they just spent 10 minutes building up.
Exactly. The argument feels bifurcated. The listener is left doing all the work to connect thermodynamics to the failure of the printing press.
So what's the fix?
The fix, I think, is to use the concept of the two books, the Book of Revelation and the Book of Nature, as the explicit structural spine for the entire piece, not just as an introduction.
Which is interesting because the speaker actually sets that up. They talk about the two legs of Quranic epistemology, Gaib, the unseen, and Shahada, the witnessed. But then they just drop it.
Completely. So let's take a concrete example. The section on the Taqiyuddin Observatory in the 1570s. Right now, it's framed as this story of just sheer ignorance.
Yeah, the gossip about astronomers looking under the skirts of angels, it's a memorable story.
It is, but it's presented as just stupid people doing stupid things, which kind of misses the bigger thematic point. It needs to be reframed.
How?
It needs to be framed as an act of closing the book of nature. The speaker should explicitly contrast the reading of the lightning, understanding its physical cause, with the refusal to read the skies with the observatory.
Oh, I see. So it's not just a political tragedy anymore. It becomes a theological failure.
Exactly.
The argument becomes something like, just as the thunder demands we understand its physics, the stars demanded we understand them through the telescope. And when we destroyed it, we weren't just breaking a building. We were tearing out pages from God's other book.
Yes. That weaves the science right into the history. It raises the stakes. You're not just bad at science, you are actively failing to read one of God's revelations. It keeps that objective feel from the opening.
Speaking of objective truth, we have to talk about the math section. Introducing mathematical constants like pi and the Planck constant to explain God. I mean, that is a high-concept intellectual risk.
It's a massive swing, a huge one. The speaker says God is a universal constant and compares the divine to pi, 3.14, or the Planck constant.
Right, and he says you can't round these numbers off, they're absolute. And then he pivots to me, God is the constant of existence.
And that's where the logic gets a little shaky.
It's very shaky. It really risks sounding like numerology. If I'm skeptical, I'm immediately thinking, wait, are you saying God is a number? Or that God is bound by math? It mixes up physical constants, which are things we measure inside the universe,
with a metaphysical constant, which is supposed to be the creator of the universe.
It's a category error.
It is. Pi describes a relationship in a circle. It doesn't create the circle. The speaker has to strengthen that philosophical bridge. They need to distinguish between what we could call descriptive constants and the generative constant.
Right. Because if you don't, you imply that God is just another variable in the cosmic equation, instead of the author of the equation itself.
So when the text says you can't round off pi, you can't make 3.14 into just 3, that idea needs to be tied much more rigorously to the concept of tawhid, of oneness.
So instead of just saying God is a constant,
the argument should be more like, just as the physical universe collapses without the Planck constant holding it together, the meaning of the universe collapses without the divine.
You could even bring the thunder back in here. Thunder is the variable, the laws of physics that create it are the constants.
Exactly. It clarifies that he isn't calling God a number, but the axiom that numbers themselves rest on. Pi is the fingerprint, God is the hand. That scaffolding protects the argument.
It makes it robust theology instead of pseudoscience. It creates a necessary hierarchy. God first, then math, then matter.
Which is critical. But even if the logic is perfected, we have another issue. It's the emotional delivery. The tone used to critique historical figures, and really the audience's ancestors it. It swings between analysis and just berating them.
Oh, I felt that. I really did. The heat coming off the page in that section was intense. The speaker asks, "Are you not ashamed?" He uses words like stupid, ignorant. He talks about the 300-year delay on the printing press and how in 1915 the Ottomans were using Czech cannons because they hadn't innovated since 1453.
The passion is undeniable. It's powerful. But it feels misplaced. When you start scolding the audience about their grandfathers, people get defensive.
They shut down. They feel attacked for sins they didn't commit, and the speaker goes from being a guide to being a prosecutor.
And what's frustrating is that the facts themselves are infuriating. The stagnation was real, but yelling at people is not the way to get them to listen.
So you don't soften the facts.
You don't soften the facts, you shift the rhetorical stance. The move here is from accusation to tragic irony. Instead of yelling, "You were ignorant," you frame it as, "Look at the tragedy of what we lost."
Tragic irony. That invites the audience to mourn with you rather than defend themselves from you. It implies the potential was always there. It was just missed.
Let's use the cannon example. Comparing the 1453 cannons to the 1915 Skoda cannons, the text asks, "Where were you, beautiful brother?" in this really accusatory way.
Right.
A much stronger way to do it would be to use the speaker's own analogy from earlier, the prosthetic leg.
that was about adding Zan superstition to the body of knowledge, right? Making it a cripple?
Yes, a three-legged man is slower than a two-legged man. So you apply that analogy to the history.
So instead of yelling about the cannons, you'd say
something like, because we chose to rely on the prosthetic leg of superstition, our hands were too busy holding crutches to build the printing press. Our body of knowledge was crippled.
Wow. Yeah. That is so much more effective. It positions the speaker as a doctor diagnosing a sickness, not a judge handing down a sentence.
We are sick, and here is the path to healing is motivating. You are stupid is just paralyzing. It unifies everyone against the problem.
Okay, which brings us to the very end of the piece. The lecture spends all this time on science, nature, thunder, history. And then, in the last few minutes, it pivots hard.
A very hard pivot.
To a strong anti-war stance. He's talking about the Constitution of Medina, quoting, "No compulsion in religion," discussing the conquest of Mecca.
And it feels like a totally separate sermon that's just been tacked on. The sentiment is powerful. Islam means peace, but the connection is gone. You're left thinking, what does this have to do with the static electricity of thunder?
It really does feel like two different speeches got merged together.
So the goal has to be linking that peace and no coercion argument back to the nature argument, to make the conclusion cyclical.
The argument needs to be that no coercion is itself a natural law, like gravity.
In the logic of this lecture, yes. He even brings up that Quranic metaphor of the foam versus the gem, or the froth and the sediment. The froth is the useless stuff that floats away.
And the gem is what remains in the earth to benefit mankind. Right. As for the foam, it passes away as scum.
He uses it to talk about goodness in general, but he should use it to explain the futility of forced conversion. Argue that just like you can't force lightning to strike differently than physics demands, you can't force belief into a human heart.
So violence and forced conversion, that's the foam. It's artificial, it's temporary, it just washes away.
And sincere, unforced belief is the sediment. It's natural, it's heavy, it endures.
That lands so much harder. It unifies the entire lecture, from the scientific opening to the ethical closing. Peace isn't just a nice idea. It's the natural state of things when you read the universe correctly.
It suggests that war and coercion are literally unnatural.
Wow. Okay. So, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have. First, structuring the two books' epistemology to weave the history and science together. Then, refining the God as constant analogy to give it proper philosophical scaffolding.
Then, calibrating the tone from scolding to one of tragic irony. And finally, integrating that peace message back into the nature motif to really close the loop.
It just shows that even when you have incredible expertise and passion, which this speaker clearly does, structure is what lets that passion land with the listener.
Yeah. It's about building a house for your ideas, not just throwing bricks of information at people.
So to the author of this lecture, the raw materials you have are exceptional. The knowledge, the imagery, it's all there. With these structural refinements, this goes from a very good lecture to a truly legacy-defining speech. We invite you to refine the flow and tone, and please resubmit for a final polish.
Thanks for listening to The Critique.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are looking at the sky, and then we are looking at the book, and we are asking a dangerous, fundamental question. Which one is the primary text of God? We're dissecting a lecture by Mustafa Islamoglu, lesson 92, specifically which analyzes Surah Ar-Ra'd, or the thunder. But I want to be clear right from the jump. This isn't just a scripture study. This is, it's an autopsy. We're performing an autopsy on why civilizations collapse and how the anatomy of belief actually works.
It is a heavy topic, and the stakes are incredibly high. We're essentially grappling with the tension between the book of the universe, nature, physics, reality, and the book of scripture, the revelation. The core tension the lecturer presents is striking, and frankly, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Does true devotion require us to migrate away from traditional dogma and toward scientific inquiry? Or, if we do that, do we risk turning the divine into nothing more than a physics equation?
I'll put my cards on the table immediately. My read of the source material is that it's a manifesto for rationalism. The argument here is that the Muslim world's decline is directly linked to a refusal to read the book of the universe. We have prioritized tradition over truth and rumor over reality. The source suggests that if you cannot understand the mechanism of creation, your theology is fundamentally broken. You're illiterate in God's primary language.
And that is where I have to draw a line. While the source absolutely validates science, even demands it, which we'll get to, I believe it maintains a critical firewall. Science explains the how, the mechanism. Faith explains the why, the constant. My position is that the lecturer is warning us against a one-eyed view of the world. We need to navigate the witness realm of empirical data without losing the unseen realm of the divine. If we strip away the mystery entirely, as you seem ready to do, we aren't purifying our faith, we're just secularizing it.
Let's get into the position statements because the metaphor used to kick this off is absolutely critical for understanding the rest of the argument.
Go ahead.
The source uses this very vivid imagery. The Quran, the text itself, is a finger pointing at a moon. The moon is the universe. It's reality. It is nature. The argument is that for centuries, religious communities have been obsessing over the finger. We study the finger, we decorate the finger, we write volumes about the finger, but we never look at where it's pointing. This is what the lecturer calls idolatry of the finger. You're worshiping the pointer and ignoring the point.
It's a powerful critique of literalism, I'll grant you that. It suggests we're stuck on the signpost rather than walking the road.
It's more than a critique, it's a diagnosis of failure. Look at the title of the surah itself, Rod, the thunder. The lecture points out that historically almost every culture deified thunder. You had Zeus throwing bolts in Greece, Thor with his hammer in Scandinavia, Perun for the Slavs, the Maya thunder gods. Why? Because of fear and ignorance. They didn't understand the mechanism, so they invented a deity to explain the noise. They filled the gap with a god.
Right, the god of the gaps. When you don't know what makes the noise, you assume it's a person or a being.
Exactly. But look, the source is brutal with the facts here. Thunder is not a god. Thunder is static electricity. It's the friction of cold air and water droplets generating a sudden discharge of energy. The heat generated is 30,000 degrees Celsius. That is 5 times the surface temperature of the sun. Those are the facts. The thesis I'm arguing is that knowledge kills false gods. As we learn the physics, the sacred mysteries vanish, and we're left with the mechanism. Therefore, scientific inquiry is the highest form of worship because it clears away the superstition. If you know the physics, you don't worship the thunder. You admire the system.
I see why you think that, and I agree that we must stop worshiping the phenomenon. However, I think your takeaway misses the nuance of the two-legged anatomy the lecturer describes. He breaks knowledge down into 2 distinct categories, Gaib and Shahada. We really need to define these clearly because, well, the whole argument rests on them.
Fair enough. Break it down.
Shahada is the witnessed realm. That's your 30,000 degrees Celsius. That's everything you can measure, weigh, and test. That is the domain of science. But Gaib is the unseen. This is the realm of God, the afterlife, the essence of the human soul. The source is explicit about this. You cannot measure the divine with a ruler. My argument is that, well, let me put it this way. While you want to use the witnessed to explain everything, the source warns that these 2 realms have different rules. We must not confuse knowing how lightning works with understanding the creator. If we try to turn God into an object of study like a rock or a cloud, we're committing a different kind of idolatry. We're making the infinite finite.
But isn't the refusal to measure exactly what leads to superstition? If we keep retreating into the unseen, we end up defending nonsense. We end up defending thunder gods because we're afraid to use a thermometer.
Not if we respect the boundary. The physics sets the stage, but it doesn't write the play. You can analyze the ink and paper of a love letter all you want. That's the Shahada. But you won't find the love itself under a microscope. That's the Gaib.
That's poetic, but I think the physics is the love letter in this case. And this brings us to the first major point of contention in our debate, the prosthetic leg of religion. This is one of the most provocative metaphors in the entire lecture, and I really want to dig into it.
The third leg, yes. It's a very strange image.
It's strange, but it's brilliant.
The lecturer argues that the natural body of faith stands on two legs: revelation, the text, and observation, the universe. That's a healthy walking body: left foot, right foot, text, nature. But historically, the Muslim world added a third leg, a prosthetic. And this third leg is zan.
Which translates roughly to conjecture, assumption, or rumor.
Right. It's the accumulated weight of unverified hadith, rigid fiqh jurisprudence that refuses to evolve, and certain mystical traditions that divorce themselves from reality. The critique here is scathing, the lecturer says.
If you add a wooden leg to a healthy body, you don't make it faster. You make it a cripple. You disable it. This prosthetic of tradition is what has hobbled the civilization. It's why they couldn't walk forward.
It is a harsh image. I mean, to call centuries of scholarship a wooden leg is quite the statement. It suggests all that accumulated wisdom was actually a burden. But look at the evidence provided. The source points to the war on the printing press. This is a historical fact that defines the region. In the Ottoman lands, the adoption of the printing press was delayed for nearly 300 years, 3 centuries. While Europe was printing books, spreading literacy, and igniting the scientific revolution, the Ottoman religious establishment blocked it. And for what? Why?
Well, there were economic arguments. The Calligraphers Guild had a lot of power.
But they used the prosthetic to justify their greed. They claimed the printing press would desecrate the scripture. They used zan, rumor, and superstition to protect a business model, and the result was a massive literacy gap that the region is still recovering from. And then there is the destruction of Taqiyuddin's observatory.
The one in the 1570s?
Exactly. The one in the 1570s. This is the smoking gun for me. Taqiyuddin built a facility in Istanbul dedicated to reading the book of the universe, the Shahada. It was a scientific marvel comparable to anything in Europe at the time, and it was destroyed by cannon fire from the Ottoman Navy. They shelled their own observatory.
It was a tragedy, undoubtedly, a massive unforced error.
But why? It was destroyed because the clerics claimed the astronomers were looking under the angel's skirts. That is the prosthetic at work. That is zan. A silly, superstitious, slightly perverted rumor was used to destroy scientific progress. If you didn't have this third leg of tradition getting in the way, that observatory would have stood, and the history of science might look very different.
Hold on. I think you're conflating tradition with corruption. I don't buy that the prosthetic is the wisdom of the past itself. The source is critiquing Zan's unfounded suspicion, not the concept of accumulated knowledge. The problem with the angel skirts accusation wasn't that it came from religion, it was that it was a weaponized lie.
But the religion provided the weapon. That's my point. The prosthetic is what allowed them to frame science as a sin.
Power will always find a weapon. The ulema, the scholars, were protecting their political status against the scientists. That's human corruption. The source actually values the sweat of the brow in intellectual pursuit. The lecturer isn't saying burn the library of the past. He's saying don't idolize the rumors. If we cut off the prosthetic entirely, as you suggest, do we lose the cultural memory that binds a community? The source mentions that the blind and the seeing are not equal. Sometimes tradition is what helps us see the moral dimension, even while science shows us the physical one.
I'd argue that if your moral dimension leads you to blow up an observatory, your morality is flawed. The source suggests that the disability is self-inflicted. If your tradition prevents you from accepting that the Earth is round or that evolution is a mechanism, that tradition is a blindfold. And this ties directly into our second point, which takes us from history into high-level physics, the nature of God as a constant, the existence constant.
This was the section dealing with pi and the Planck constant. It was a fascinating pivot in the lecture.
It's brilliant. The lecturer moves from history to math. He brings up pi, 3.14159, and it goes on forever. You cannot negotiate with pi. You can't ask it to be 3.15 because you're having a bad day or because your tradition prefers round numbers. It is an objective reality. Then he mentions the Planck constant, 10 to the minus 43. He calls this the Allahu Akbar point.
The limit of existence, the smallest possible unit of space and time.
Correct. The smallest pixel of reality. These numbers are immutable. They are the laws of the book of the universe. My position here is that God is found in these unchangeable laws. To deny reality, like denying evolution or the age of the earth, is to deny the existence constant. The source actually quotes, "Evolution is not a matter of belief, it is a matter of knowledge. You don't believe in gravity, you just fall."
That is a compelling argument for objective reality, but have you considered the limitation the source places on it? The lecturer explicitly asks, why is pi 3.14? Why not something else?
And the answer is, it just is. That's the constant.
Exactly. We don't know why. We hit a hard wall of human reason. We can know the number, but we cannot know the intent behind the number. This is where the unseen comes back in. You want to define God by the math, but the source argues that while the math is a bridge, it's not the destination. The lecturer talks about having memories with God. He describes the ocean floor of the human heart that only God knows.
Memories with God sounds poetic, but it feels subjective. It feels like we're drifting back into feelings over facts.
It's experiential. A mathematical constant, 3.14, doesn't care if you are suffering. It doesn't care if you are in the depths of a well, metaphorically speaking. The God described in the source, despite being linked to these constants, is also the God of the broken heart. If we reduce God to the Planck constant, we lose the personal relationship. We turn theology into geometry. You can't pray to a triangle.
But when we focus on the broken heart and ignore the geometry, we get the angel's skirts again. That's the danger. The lecture explicitly mocks people who say, "I don't believe in evolution," as if it's a menu choice. The speaker says, you are functionally illiterate in God's primary language. If God is the existence constant, then studying physics is studying God's nature. When we retreat into feelings, we risk sliding back into that prosthetic leg creating a God that fits our emotional needs rather than the God that exists in reality.
I think you're creating a binary that the source actually tries to resolve. The source says the blind and the seeing are not equal. Seeing the math is one eye, seeing the meaning is the other. If you only see the math, you are technically correct but spiritually blind. This leads us to the third point, which I think is crucial for the meaning side of things. We need to talk about the metaphor of foam versus ore.
This comes straight from the text of Surah Ar-Ra'd. It says, فَجَوَابُ الَّذِي فِيهِ الْمَاءُ يَنْفَعُ وَيُرَحُ فِي الْأَرْضِ كَالرِّيَاحِ. The torrent carries foam which vanishes, but that which benefits people remains in the earth. The lecturer interprets this in a very utilitarian, almost industrial way.
Utilitarian? That's an interesting take. How so?
He contrasts the Ottoman military technology with the West. He describes the Ottoman cannons firing marble balls, literal stones. Meanwhile, the opposing technology had moved to explosive shells and rifled barrels. The foam was the empty boast of the empire, the pomp, the costume, the noise. The ore, the thing that remains, is what actually works. It's technological substance. The lack of ore led to the collapse. He even brings it to the present day. He asked the audience, what vaccine did we invent? What library did we build? That is the ore.
That is certainly one layer. The technological deficit is undeniable, and the lecturer is very hard on the Muslim world for failing to contribute to human progress in recent centuries. But I believe the source pivots to a much deeper ethical dimension of what remains. The ore isn't just industrial output, it's moral consistency.
But surely the tangible result is the best metric of the moral core? If you can't build a vaccine, your moral core isn't saving lives, you're just full of foam.
Look at the example he uses for permanence. He talks about the conquest of Mecca. When the prophet entered the city, he had every right, by the standards of the time, to take captives, to exact revenge. He had the power. But instead, he said, "Go, you are free." That act of mercy is the ore. That is what built a civilization. Contrast that with the sword or religion mindset, forced conversions.
He does mention the forced conversions, specifically referencing the Sabbatai Sevi incident.
Right, the Jewish figure in the 17th century who was forced to convert to Islam under threat of death. The lecturer argues that this created a legacy of hypocrites rather than believers. It created foam. If you put a gun to someone's head and say, "Become Muslim," you haven't created a believer, you've created a liar.
That foam washes away or turns toxic. The or is the trust established by ethical conduct. You can have all the technology in the world, you can have the best observatories, but if you force people to believe, you are building on foam.
I'm not convinced that moral clarity alone saves a civilization that refuses to look through a telescope. The tragedy of the observatory wasn't a moral failure in the sense of kindness. It was an intellectual failure. They chose the angel skirts, a fantasy over the stars. The source says the blind and the seeing are not equal. To me, the seeing are those who look at the universe as it is, not as they wish it to be. The or is objective reality. If your ethics are based on a false view of the world, like a flat earth or a thunder god, your ethics are unstable.
And I would argue that if your objective reality has no ethical why behind it, it is just a machine. The source mentions that God is the existence constant. Yes, but it also says knowledge leads to one. That one is not just a mathematical singularity, it's a moral center. The lecture criticizes the modern world too. He says we have become enemies of what we don't know. We need the unseen to keep us humble. If we think we can measure everything with a ruler, we end up worshiping the ruler.
But if we refuse to use the ruler, we end up worshiping the thunder. That is the cycle the lecture wants to break. The speaker asks, why did we fall? And the answer isn't because we weren't nice enough. The answer is because we added a third leg of conjecture and forgot how to walk. We fought the printing press for 300 years. That is a loss of orc that no amount of ethical posturing can recover.
It is a loss, I agree, but consider the speaker's final reflection. He asks, is the blindness a lack of scientific education or a lack of spiritual insight? He seems to suggest they're one and the same. You cannot have true spiritual insight if you deny the physical reality God created. But, and this is my firm stance, you cannot fully understand the physical reality if you strip it of its sanctity. The observatory should have been protected because it was a religious duty to observe, not just a scientific one.
There we can agree. The observation is the religious duty.
But we must be careful. The lecture warns against the idolatry of the finger, but there is also an idolatry of the telescope. We need both legs. The witnessed gives us the ground to stand on, but the unseen gives us the direction to walk.
As we wrap up, I think we have illuminated the core tension here perfectly. My takeaway from this source material is a call to action. It's a demand to abandon the darkness of blind tradition, the prosthetic that has hobbled progress. We must treat the universe as a Quran. If we don't understand the how, the science, the math, the mechanism, we are functionally illiterate in God's primary language. The lecture is a plea to stop looking under angel skirts and start looking at the stars.
And my takeaway is that while we must embrace the witnessed, we must not lose the unseen. The tragedy of the observatory was indeed a loss of data, but it was primarily a loss of the ability to see God's signs. We need both legs to walk. The or is the benefit we leave behind, and that benefit is both technological and ethical. We cannot simply engineer our way to salvation. We must also conduct ourselves with the mercy that lets captives go free.
The blind and the seeing are not equal. A powerful closing thought from the source.
Indeed. And perhaps the true sight is knowing which eye to use for which truth.
That does it for this episode of The Debate. We'll leave you to decide where the foam ends and the or begins.
Until next time.